Our next speaker is the wonderful Dr. Matt Zakreski. Now, Matt comes from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the United States, and he is the co-founder and lead psychologist at the Neurodiversity Collective. He is passionate, among other things, around the area of giftedness. And so, welcome today, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. So, Matt, the first question I've got for you is, what challenges do you see in the current education system?
Oh boy, just a few, So let's start with a classic example, right? Say you come into school, right, and you can already read Winnie the Pooh. And everybody else in your little classroom is learning the letters, and then the letters make words, and the words make sentences, and the sentences make paragraphs, and the paragraphs make books. Now, that's 2 years of work for your peers, right? You're already reading the Winnie the Pooh, and Winnie the Pooh isn't exactly see, Dick, run, right? It's a much more complex book. So you're given 3 choices. Learn something you already know, ask for something new, or give up, right? And that is a huge choice to be asking kids as they walk into an educational system, and I remember sitting there in class and knowing all my letters and turning my letters into words, and the teacher kept telling me, no, stop that, don't do that. I said, I know this, I want to do the next thing. And what happens with bright learners and twice exceptional learners is they run from the pack and are forcibly pushed back, and sometimes the best we can hope for them is that maybe they're left to run on their own. Maybe it's a gentle pushback. Those of us who are lucky get a new herd to run with, and that new herd encourages us to run faster and go new places. But for many of us, it is a sharp shove back to the pack. And fundamentally, the education system is about teaching the most people the most stuff in the same way, right? It's based off the conveyor belt process, and it's just not. It's a one size fits all model. But you show me 2 people who have the same brain who learn alike, right? And the more we know about brains, the more nobody learns alike. So meeting people where we are is where education not only needs to go, it's where it must go. And that way we can realistically start teaching people what they need to learn, how they need to learn it, so people feel more engaged and satisfied with their education.
Thank you. That's absolutely wonderful, Matt. It's so true in so many different ways. And so thinking about that, what do you wish you'd learned at school?
Oh boy. So here's a really good example. Okay. So my giftedness, right, is more in the writing, reading, art world. Like that's where my gifts are. I use words for a living, so that's good. That's, as a psychologist, right? Words have power. I'm not so great with the science and math and computers side of things. But what I found in the education system was that I slotted in, and I feel like a lot of gifted people have this experience that, okay, even though my giftedness doesn't manifest in science, math, tech, I'm still a gifted learner. I still need to be encouraged and pushed and engage with things deeply. And it felt like, okay, once you've fallen off that lane of the highway, well, then you have to go on the surface roads and putter along. So I was still bored and underwhelmed by the content in just regular honors physics. And it was this thing where that gets to me the quality of teaching, of how we are teaching our kids to engage with the material. I loved physics labs. I like getting my hands dirty. I like conceptualizing things. But, I can buy a textbook and read it and pass the chapter test. And that to me is not, it's not the spirit of true education, right? It's not why we send kids out in the world. When you think about the teachers that changed your life, when you're an adult and you're sitting here in this kind of interview, you don't think about those who taught to the book. You think about the teachers who made it come alive and letting you touch it and feel it and chew on it. And So we're still gifted learners, even if we're not in gifted education or we're not in our AP, IB classes. And that's something I think a lot of educators forget, is you bring your brain with you wherever you go, from art to gym class, to the lunchroom, to shop, to physics, to English, to whatever comes across your way. So we need to think about how to encourage deep dives and meaningful engagement, regardless of the level to which the information is being taught.
Wow, there's so much you've said there. You're talking about the inspirational teachers that actually make the subjects come alive, that content come alive, that spark our own curiosity going off into lots of different directions. You're talking about so many different areas that people are gifted in, and almost the box that people are put in order to be, this is what you need to learn, as opposed to you're gifted in this area. How can we foster you? People's different interests being in the subjects in different ways. So much going on there. Yeah, there's a wonderful phrase which I see time and time again within education, which is, do you see me? Do you know me? And what you're talking about here is teachers seeing and knowing the students and knowing their strengths, and helping those students to be able to identify and to be able to run with their own strengths as well, isn't it?
And to think about this, so some of the best ways, what do a lot of kids care about? Sports, right? So my physics teacher, who made physics come alive for me, was a former professional ultimate frisbee player. So you want to learn about drag, you want to learn about lift, you want to learn about air friction. Let's go out on the quad and we'll throw a frisbee around. And he would literally say, like, now your spin rate is X, the wind resistance is Y, what's that doing? And then you do the math in your head because you cared about it. So maybe it's basketball, arcs of shots, and that's calculus, right? Maybe it's you're playing rugby and you're talking about force vectors of, player X is moving at this rate, player Y is moving at this rate, they collide. What is the transfer of force? And you maybe get a student who couldn't care less about the physical properties of the ball moving across the floor, but all of a sudden, like, well, I play rugby. I'm a fly half. I need to know how much force they're hitting me with, how many newtons. And that's how it makes it come alive. Maybe it's cars, maybe it's skiing or snowboarding. And one of the physics professors I ran across when I was in university did a course on the physics of fishing, which blew my mind. I only sat in on one class, but you think about it, water has entirely different physical properties than air. And if you're a fisherman, if you enjoy fishing, if you like the water, well, boy, the physics come alive in that moment for you because you are genuinely engaging with something that has meaning for you. So, when we get to know our kids, we get to know what they care about. When we get to know what they care about, we make the content fit the caring. Positive change, meaningful change always flows better from an area of interest and strength. So if you tell me, Cathy, that you love gardening, right? That's when you want to, beautiful flowers behind you, right? So, okay, how do we make science and gardening come alive to you? Because I guarantee you're going to care more about what I'm teaching you if it's around an area you're passionate about, are already good at, and want to learn more about. And what ends up happening is we teach our kids the things they don't want to learn in the most boring possible way. And then we get upset with them when they disengage. Jim has 5 apples. Frank has 3 apples. How many? I'm falling asleep, right? Those are the things we need to think about, because the organic engagement with meaningful content is at the core of any good relationship. You and I wouldn't keep having conversations if we weren't both really passionate, interesting people to talk to. And yet here we are yet again. So we must be doing something right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is great to talk with you again. And what I'm hearing in here as well is that connection between the two people, but also about bringing in people's passions and interests, both the teachers being able to bring in their passion and interest, and also the student being able to respond from their passion and interest. And this provokes curiosity, which broadens people's minds, doesn't it? Opens new possibilities, new pathways. And another thing that is within there is the importance of experiential learning, bringing the real experiences into the classroom. And that's something that I'm talking with many people about. They're bringing that into these conversations as well. The more experiential learning that we can bring in, the more it provokes curiosity, the more it becomes real rather than stuff out of a textbook. So thank you. Okay, talking about giftedness, because there's giftedness in so many different ways, right?
Oh, yes.
And it's a word that can bring up lots of emotion in people as to, why are they gifted and why are they gifted and why am I not gifted? Or, particularly with parents as well, as they're talking about their children, it can bring up lots of different emotions. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
So yeah, we need to, first and foremost, we need to divorce giftedness from elitism. We need to divorce giftedness from academically advanced. We need to divorce giftedness from Harvard, Yale, right? I mean, yes, are there gifted kids who go to those elite programs? There are, for certain, right? And are there gifted kids who do well in school? Yes, there are, for certain. But giftedness does not always play well with the educational system. And increasingly, as I work as a psychologist and a consultant to schools, I end up talking to schools about, we need to teach these kids a different way. Classic gifted kid example, right? So Cathy, have you ever heard of the gifted kid C? No.
No, I haven't.
Right. So the idea here is your gifted kid doesn't engage in the homework and class participation. So they get zeros for those things. But the gifted kid is taking in the information very quickly and gets hundreds in all the tests and papers. What does that average out to at the end of the quarter? A C. And so when I talk to schools and I'm looking for gifted kids, I say, yes, I want your straight A students who clearly mind's going a mile a minute, bring them to me. But I also want the kids who frustrate you. I want the kids that if they could just get it together, right? And whenever I say that phrase, if they could just get it together, hands pop up, right? That's when teachers, because the teachers, those kids stick in your mind, right? It's not somebody who gets basically an 80 on everything. That's important, but not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the kids that, oh, they just make me want to bang my head against a wall. And this is where we need to, because the conversation is inevitably, how do we get Sally to turn in her homework? Homework is supposed to be practice, and the practice is supposed to be towards mastery. If the kid has already gained mastery, why would we have them practice? We don't practice walking anymore, right? We're pretty sure we've got that down, right? And so it's that same thing, because kids don't care about it and kids don't do it, but then they're penalized for that, which sets up a cycle of poor grades so you don't end up getting into the gifted program. So let's think about another direction. Let's start with a pre-assessment. Let's talk about, what does Sally already know? What does Sally need to know? Let's teach her that thing. Sally knows that thing. Great. Fantastic. Let's move on with our lives, right? And then Sally learns that, learns it quickly, feels engaged, feels meaningful. We move on to the next thing. So now we're moving at the correct pace. And when I describe that as gifted education to parents, they go, oh no, that sounds good. That's actually what I want for all of my, because dirty little secrets, that best practices in gifted education are best practices in education, full stop. And I will say that, I will bang on every door until someone listens to me about that. But it's the sort of thing, the system is built. I'm sorry.
What you're talking about there is also looking for the children that are bored, that are not engaged. And there are so many of those, and asking, how can we engage those children? What is interesting for them?
Yeah. And especially if their giftedness doesn't play nicely in a classroom. You're gifted artists, you're gifted dancers, you're gifted musicians, you're gifted problem-solving builders. right? They aren't going to care about what the capital of Fiji is. There's just that has no meaningful interest to them. I liked stuff like that in school because I have a mind for trivia, right? I like that stuff. But most people don't care about it. And this is where inevitably someone says like, well, shouldn't kids learn that they can't always do what they want? Obviously. I mean, that's to me, that's asked and answered. But the best way to get somebody to tolerate something that they don't really want to do is to surround them with stuff that they really want to do. And you say, yes, I know you don't want to take this pretest, but you take the pretest, then I can just teach you the one or two things you need to know, and then we all move on, right? I don't need you to start with what is the letter A, but if you need to learn how to write compound sentences, I'm just going to teach you that. Boom, you're writing stories, and then we're into creative writing, and that is something you care about. So it's how quickly can we get kids to a meaningful output of product rather than 6 to 7 years of giving them the stuff they need to somehow do the product in the future, because that's where we're losing people. And, in my own educational system, I can't tell you how many times I sat there bored and frustrated and filling the backs of worksheets with doodles because I already knew it. I already got it done. I did it 6, 7 times over already. And when I asked for more things, sometimes they gave me more things to do. Most of the time they just said, just sit quietly. And kids aren't built to sit quietly. And it's that same thing. We're setting up a cycle where kids are going to get into trouble through no fault of their own. Because if you're sitting there staring around the room when everybody else is working feverishly, you stand out. And then you stand out, nothing good's going to come from that.
That's exactly right. And so you're talking about meaningful product for the person, for that individual, not because the system is saying that this is what you need to produce at this particular time. And then we will have people growing and learning much, 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 much more quickly.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so one of the topics that we're leading into right now is leading into the idea of imposter syndrome. And why is that? You talked about it being almost the second conversation that you have with people following on from that idea of giftedness, straight into imposter syndrome. So what is imposter syndrome?
So imposter syndrome is a psychological phenomenon where you feel like a fraud. And you constantly are worried that someone is going to discover you as a fraud and thus take away the thing you have, right? So in psychology language, it's someone who isn't able to internalize their successes and lives in fear of negative feedback around their performance. So both of those things have to be true. One of the things we know about imposter syndrome is that it is rooted in people who feel markedly different than their environments. So say you're the only gifted kid in your homeroom, and there are 23 other kids in there, and they're running around and they're doing their numbers and they're doing their times tables and they're practicing writing, and you are writing computer programs in your spare time, and you've finished all the Harry Potter books, and you just know in your gut you are different. You are different than everybody else. And maybe a teacher finds you and says, you're different. Your brain works differently. I'm going to send you to this other classroom with other kids like you. And you walk in there and you are so aware of the fact that you're different. And that brings up this feeling of, I'm an imposter. I'm an imposter, and they're going to find me out. So I either need to work so hard that nobody ever notices me and I burn myself out, or I'm going to freeze and then people are going to notice me because I haven't moved in 3 days, right? So that's the imposter phenomenon. And it manifests in many different ways for those of us who are very bright, for those of us who think deeply, because there's this perception, and perception is the most important part of imposter syndrome. There's this perception that other people have things we don't have, other people know things we don't know, and other people are doing things in ways that we just don't understand. And if you actually talked to your classmates, coworkers, peers, friends, whatever, you're going to find out, nope, they're all in the same anxious boat that you are. You're all suffering in silence. But that's not what anxiety tells us. Anxiety says, no, you can't say anything because then they'll know. So you have to be very quiet.
So Matt, one of the things that happens in people's brains is the things like, who am I to be able to do this? Why me?
Mm.
Everybody else is better than me, or those sorts of things are the voice that goes on in our head when we are suffering from imposter syndrome. And this isn't just in gifted people, is it? So many people experience these thoughts going on in our brains.
Completely. And one of the things, so for instance, after I finished university, I had the opportunity to have a research internship at Harvard University. Yeah, so arguably the top university in the world, right? So big deal, yay for me. Now, I'm a really smart person, right? I've built my whole personal and professional identity around being gifted. So I didn't apply to Harvard. I might have gotten in, I might not have. But when I walked on campus, I thought to myself, I don't belong here. Everybody else went to Ivy League schools, but other people went to Harvard. I mean, and then at orientation, I'm listening to the other students saying where they went, and it wasn't Harvard, 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 Yale, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, Harvard. It was Morehouse College and Union College and NYU and Wake Forest, where I went, and excellent top schools, but it wasn't this reach into a bucket of Ivy League students and put them in a classroom. It was a mixed bag. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't where we went that mattered, is what we did with our experiences that mattered, right? We had all pursued high-level research psychology, and that's why we were at Harvard doing high-level research psychology. And once that clicked into place, I realized it didn't matter. It didn't matter that I'm from a small town in New Jersey and I went to public school and I went to Wake Forest. I'm at Harvard. I was at Harvard the same way that someone who grew up very wealthy, went to elite prep schools and went to Harvard and now is doing research at Harvard, because we're in the same lab. And our email addresses both say at harvard.edu, right? And there's something freeing about realizing that whatever the things that might have made you not fit in, things that might have excluded you, didn't. You could have been knocked down, you could have been waylaid, and you ended up here anyway. One of our lab mates was a 26-year-old college junior who had served in the military, and he would say to me every day, I don't belong here, Matt, I don't belong here. These kids, I'm like, hey, first off, you're the only one among us other than me who can buy beer legally. So that automatically makes you cool, right? But more importantly, it doesn't matter how you got here. It matters that you're here. And that is an antidote to imposter syndrome, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is about taking that space at the moment and owning who you are, isn't it? Yeah. And going, it doesn't matter how I got here, but it is, what do I do now? So what does it look like in leaders? What does imposter syndrome look like in leaders? And by the way, when I'm talking about leaders, I believe every single person in this world is a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And when they discover who they are and are able to follow their passions, their strengths, who they are, which is exactly what we're talking about here as well in this Ignite Your Leadership Summit, is how do we help people to be able to own their greatness, their giftedness.
Oh, I love it. And so I'll start with a personal reflection. When I was originally connected with you, I had a shot of imposter syndrome. Why would Cathy want to talk to me? Who am I, right? I'm some wet behind the ears psychologist from Philadelphia, and this is an international conference of big deal people, and why? And so I let those thoughts wash over me because they show up whether I want them to or not. And then I thought, okay.
It is so funny, Matt, because I'm having exactly the same things from this side. Who am I? From this little town in New Zealand, right? Well, actually, it's a big town in New Zealand, which is a little town worldwide, right? And who am I from this little space in New Zealand to be thinking that I can connect with all of these different people? And so, and I'm hearing this sort of stuff from so many different people that we're talking to, but it is time to step up and to be able to own our spaces and own our experiences and to be able to move forward for the good of the world.
Totally. And what we're modeling right now is the two keys of leadership that undoes imposter syndrome: emotional authenticity and committed action. If you take nothing else away from this, and I'm going to ask you a question about this later because Cathy asked me to, but those two things, emotional authenticity and committed action, then your imposter syndrome will be a loud kid in the backseat of your car, but they won't grab the wheel. And that's something we can live with, right? Because when we own this, when we are emotionally authentic with our fears, with our struggles, with our self-doubt, it takes the edge off what we're experiencing internally. Anxiety wants us to stay quiet, wants us to stay inward, right? Because then it's in charge. But we say, hey, I'm feeling super anxious, guys. I am having a tough time. Then it's like, oh, anxiety's like, great. Now he's going to go get help. And, and I don't actually have any power. And then also all the other smart, awesome people in the room who are feeling the same way you are go, wait, you too? And it's this moment, it's a universal, right? This you too, because we all deal with it. And so that emotional authenticity piece is huge, right? It's huge in that sense of untangling our relationship with anxiety. Now, how we show up authentically is different for every person. I'm a big outward facing person. Put me in front of a room of 1,000 people. And if you're listening to this, if you'd like to book me, please feel free. But that's what I do well. I do trainings, I do talks, right? Maybe your style is sitting quietly next to somebody in a one-on-one training thing and saying to them, I struggled with this too when I got here. Here's how I overcame it. You're going to overcome it. We're going to be okay. Maybe that's how maybe you write the world's best training manual and then you give it to people and it's laden with emotional authenticity that you're probably struggling with this right now, but here's the answer. You're probably struggling with this right now. Here's the answer. So that emotional authenticity leads to the committed actions, right? Because when we take the leaps, when we show up, when we're brave, imposter syndrome withers and dies. One of the great TED Talks on imposter syndrome is this guy who's started all these businesses, and his big secret, the thing that made him different, is that he didn't graduate from college. And he carried that secret with him for years and years and years. And after a while, he said, no one showed up to fire me. So I told my story. And once I survived that moment, I led more authentically. And I led with more courage because I realized if that can't knock me down, then I have earned my seat at this table. And I can do, every company he had founded, every interview on MSNBC, every sales report, new product was committed action. So when you think about anxiety tells us to be small and be still and be quiet, we're going to be loud, we're going to be bold, and we're going to be real, and we're going to do things. And when we do things, whether it's recording this talk with Cathy or asking that person out or applying for a promotion or going to graduate school, or maybe just trying the surf move you've never tried before, committed action breaks imposter syndrome. And you get to be that more authentic version of yourself.
So what we're talking about here is the fact that pretty much everybody suffers from imposter syndrome at different times. It's not just the people that are gifted. And one of the things I'm aware of in talking with different people is that the more people become aware of that negative voice in their head, the more they can use that knowledge to be able to change the outcomes. And the average person has between 60 to 80% of the thoughts about themselves in their head as being negative.
Yep.
So it's really easy to see, isn't it, where imposter syndrome comes from. If you've got this sort of voice saying, you can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, and so on. So it is something that every single person will need to deal with. Mm-hmm. And so knowing our own strengths and our own emotions and being able to handle those things helps us to be able to step on forward, doesn't it?
Yeah. And if you're someone who has that 60-80% of your negative thoughts thing, do me a favor, right? And Cathy, can I model this with you? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So in your head, I want you to picture a pink giraffe. Can you picture a pink giraffe, please?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Now let's put that pink giraffe on a skateboard. Can you picture a pink giraffe on a skateboard?
Oh yeah, he's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, right? Now look around your office. Is there a pink giraffe on a skateboard in your office?
Nope, no pink giraffe.
You sure? I don't see one in here either, right? So we've got the southern hemisphere and the northern.
Yep, and mine's eating pepperoni pizza while on a skateboard.
Oh man. So that, my friends, is what I like to call the pink giraffe test. Just because we think it doesn't make it real. So the next time you have big thoughts about imposter syndrome, I can't go for that promotion because they're going to find out that I got a C in business class in uni, so therefore I can never be a manager. Do the pink giraffe test. Just because you think it doesn't make it real. And, and those 68% of our thoughts that are negative, their only power over us is to make us think that they're more powerful than they are. They're loud and they're scary. They sharp teeth and angry noises, but all they can do is bark and snarl. They can't actually hurt us. All they can do is make us too scared to move. But committed action, emotional authenticity breaks that cycle, right? So do your pink giraffe test. Put your pink giraffe skydiving, riding a horse. I don't know how the physics of that would work. Playing rugby, surfing, fighting a bear, whatever you think about it. But it's never going to show up because the thoughts are just thoughts. And when you realize that they're just thoughts, you gain control. And when you gain control, world's your oyster.
It's absolutely, isn't it? It's focusing on what we have, what we can do and what we have, rather than focusing on what we can't or we think we can't do. So what does treatment look like in this? Is it just about creating a pink giraffe picture that is going to take these thoughts away? Or what does treatment look like for imposter syndrome?
So I want you to have a big toolbox of stuff you can use, right? Toolbox, pink giraffe test is a great one. I want you to create a folder of stuff that you have that is concrete praise you have received. I just gave a talk just the other day, and the students I gave a talk to were nice enough to send me emails saying that I did a good job. And I put all of them in my folder. And the next time I'm having a rough day, the next time my imposter syndrome shows up, bark, 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 grrr, I'm going to look at that folder, right, with evaluations and, people who have written reviews on my website. And it doesn't make the feelings go away. And I want to set that expectation. It's not a light switch. The bad feelings are gone, but we make them quieter. We muzzle them. We put them in the back seat, and we can live with that. So, pink giraffe test, folder of compliments. Next thing, who's your hero? Who's your advocate, right? The research is very clear on this. People who have a champion are more successful. They're more self-confident. They do better at work. They produce more academic papers. So who are you championing? If you don't have a person you're championing, find one, right? Who do you want to lift up? And then if you don't have a person who is championing you, how do you cultivate that relationship? When I was in my graduate psychology training, being a person that I am, I reached out to all sorts of people, and I cannot tell you how many people responded to me. I mean, I got to sit down and have a cup of coffee with Rena Subotnick, and she's a giant in our field, and she's the nicest person on the planet. Rena, if you're listening to this, hi, I love you very much. You're wonderful. And I got to have calls with Stephen Chow, and I got to meet Mike Postma. And it's these sort of things. These people have championed me and lifted me up. So then when we have more, we don't build a taller fence, we build a bigger table. So I've done my best to reach out. Who can I bring along with me? Who can I open doors for? And so we champion others and we seek champions for ourselves. But in doing that, we create a virtuous cycle because everybody gets lifted when we're lifting each other. And those things are probably the biggest tools. And then some of this also is cultural, right? If the peak leadership is modeling that emotional authenticity and committed action, if your CEO is that I have imposter syndrome, here's what it looks like for me, every employee in that staff meeting goes, wait, you too? It's that thing again. And then you can talk about that, whether you're in the warehouse, in the secretarial pool, in the IT department. You can say, my boss, the guy who sits in the big chair in the big room, deals with this, which means I can deal with it too.
Yeah.
You know, I
And
mean,
also that creates that environment where we can all bring in our strengths. And I use a lot of personality profiling or strengths profiling and so on to help people identify that these are areas that you're good at. And we can't be good at everything, right? But when we are able to work alongside with, alongside other people who are different, then we can create this almost mutual admiration society. And I love your idea of picking out that hero, who is the person you've got, the people around you that are championing you, but you've also got that idea of who do I aspire to be? If I had the choice of three people that I really, really admire, can I create a composite person of, why do I admire them? And what do I need to do to be like them, right? And then that's taking us on that pathway forward, growing our own strengths alongside the other people that we're supporting as well.
Totally. And I love the idea of growing strengths too, right? We tend to see that they're these things we just have, which is the fixed mindset. We want that to grow that mindset. I'm this good at it now. Imagine how much good at it I'll be later. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what we're talking about, isn't it? It's lifelong learning. Education doesn't just stop when we finish school. I heard somebody talk the other day, and they had been all the way through kindergarten, their school, and all the way through university. And it was like when they finished, they finally said, now let the learning begin. And and it's almost like, well, wow, what about all that learning that they've been doing in the school? But now they had the chance to be able to go, okay, what does this mean for me in my life going forward from here? And what I'd love to see and wanting to encourage through this entire movement is, how do we help people to be able to learn right throughout right from when they're a preschooler, right from when they're a little baby, stuff that helps them to grow who they are and to be able to acknowledge their strengths and to be able to praise others and to be able to see those really special things in other people so that we can make the world a better place. So last question is, if I see a student or a family member or a friend, anybody in our lives, and you're recognizing imposter syndrome in them, what can we do?
So when we see this in others, we have a couple of different tacks we can take. Let's start with something I like to call bottom-up thinking. So when we're feeling anxious, when we're feeling insecure, we do top-down thinking. So if you think about an ice cream sundae, you've got a bowl, a couple different scoops of ice cream, couple toppings, and then on top of it all, a cherry. And you look at the cherry, and the cherry is bad. It's a bad cherry. If the cherry's the first thing you see, you throw the whole ice cream out because the cherry's bad. So the ice cream's got to be bad, right? But if you invert that and you go, I like this bowl. Oh, I like this flavor of ice cream. I like this flavor of ice cream. I like this flavor of ice cream. I like whipped cream. I like chocolate sauce. I like crushed nuts. I like sprinkles. Oh, the cherry's not so good. Fling. Because you just need just the cherry, right? Bottom up thinking. So we say, okay, listen, I know you're feeling like you can't go from salesman to manager. I get that. That makes sense to me. And I did this thought process myself. I worked in sales for a while, and that's where a lot of my own leadership stuff around imposter syndrome comes from, because I don't think I'm a good salesman. I held many sales records when I worked there because I worked my butt off. But I worked my butt off because I had imposter syndrome, and it sort of fueled the cycle. But the way I led...
There's actually nothing wrong with actually having to work our butts off, right?
No,
because we're learning a whole heap of stuff through resilience and they're talking about success being 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. So we need to be able to get rid of that thought of that this is just going to magically come. We have no magic wands in this world. There are times in our lives when things are blimmin' tough, right? And so we need to be able to dig deep at these times as well, and to be able to get through and hanging on to those things about, what is true, what are my strengths, and yes, I can do that, is all part of this as well. Sorry for jumping in, but...
That's following that inspiration, right? That's exactly what we want to do. And, and I didn't know it then, but my working hard was committed action. It was, I could freeze and lose my job because I don't think I belong here, or I can work my butt off. And then when people ask me, why am I working my butt off? I can authentically say, I'm terrified. I'm so scared. I'm scared every day I'm going to lose my job. But every day I said that, that fear got a little smaller. And then every day I said it got a little smaller and I got a little easier to do my job. And I developed habits and skills that made me better at it. And then I would train new employees and I would tell them that story and say, I don't think I'm good at this. My sales numbers say otherwise. But as long as I don't believe I'm good at this, I'm going to keep making the most phone calls with anybody and I'm going to have great sales numbers. And then that was faking it until I made it for me. And that's, and you might find your own version of that. But if we go, so we'll take a quick step back, right? The bottom up thinking is, what are my skills? What am I good at? Okay, I'm very personable. I'm good on the phone. Check. I know a lot about international travel. I sold international travel, sold many trips to New Zealand, actually. Check. I'm good at that. I learned our computer system pretty quickly. Check. I work hard. I have the ability to work hard. Check. Okay, those are my positives. But now, since I've done bottom up thinking, bump, 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 I'm all the way up here. And then say, okay, what are the reasons I might not get this job? Well, I'm not very salesy. I'm not very businessy. But that feels more nebulous, right? Like the things are saying, I'm good, 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 good. I don't really have this other thing. But if I had started with, I don't really have this other thing, and then started thinking about other stuff, it doesn't feel the same. So, if you're thinking about applying for a promotion, why are you even in a position to apply for that promotion in the first place? You probably got this job for a reason. You've worked hard, you've done well, your colleagues like you, your managers like you. There's a reason you're here. And it's a nice segue into my favorite imposter syndrome story. So when I was in university, I had the opportunity to take a poetry class from Maya Angelou, the amazing poet laureate of the United States. And so it was only for a small group of seniors, and I was lucky enough to be in that class. And I said to her on day one, I said, we're going around the room introducing ourselves, and I blurted out, I don't think I belong here. And she looked at me and she said, well, Matt, one of two things is happening. A, you fooled me. You have fooled me and you tricked me, Maya Angelou, into thinking that you're a better writer than you are. Or I see something in you that maybe you don't see in yourself. And there were a few moments in my life where I have been truly speechless, and that was one of them. And I invite you, my listeners, this audience out here, to think about a moment like that for yourself and say, is it possible that they're seeing something in me that I don't see in myself? Maybe that's your partner. Maybe you don't think you deserve your partner, but your partner keeps showing up and taking you out to dinner and meeting your parents and your friends and planning weekends away. And you keep thinking, when's that other shoe going to drop? I don't belong here. But maybe they think you do. And maybe if they believing it is good enough right now. And there's so much power and there's so much freedom in letting somebody show up authentically for you. And it may not be Maya Angelou. I cannot promise you that is, read the fine print of this talk. It's not guaranteed, but maybe it's your coworker, maybe it's a manager, maybe it's your best friend.
And that's a really, really powerful tool, isn't it? Leadership is about finding the best in other people and helping them to be able to see that as well. So I think that's a really, really good place to finish this particular talk with. It's amazing that you've had that experience of working with Maya Angelou and that she was able to say that to you. What an incredible, incredible gift. Amazing. Thank you. So Matt, thank you so much for talking with us all today. You've got a final question for everybody.
I do.
So what's your final question for everyone?
So I mentioned committed action, right? So now that you've listened to this, and hopefully you're nodding along and taking notes and you're believing what we're talking about, and I hope all that's true for you. So then my question for you is, what's your next step? Because this recording is about to end, and maybe you're listening to it in the car, maybe you're at home, but the recording's about to end, and then your screen's going to go black, and you're going to be faced in a moment of choice. And in that choice moment, I'm going to say, take a next step, take a committed action. So my question to you, friends, is what is that for you? Are you sending that email? Are you applying for that job? Are you asking somebody out? Are you whatever that thing is? But find out what the next concrete step is for you to take on your own journey, and then take it. And then let us know, because I'm sure it's going to go well. I believe in you. Cathy, do you believe in them?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
See? You've already got 2 people.
And that's why we're both here, because we do believe in you. So if you can jump over into that Facebook group and to be able to pop that comment, what is your next step, down underneath where Matt is talking about that particular question. And what I know is that when we write things down, they are much more likely to happen. So jump on over in there now and write down what your next step is, and then take that committed action. So thank you so much, and all the best to everybody.